Welcome to What We Couldn't Say on Sunday, the podcast where we dive deeper into the thoughts, reflections, and messages that couldn't make it into Sunday's sermon. Whether it's a story left untold, a lesson needing more time, or a question left unanswered, this is the space where we can explore the faith journey together in a deeper, more personal way. I'm your host, Seth. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. All right, we're back, week 2 of To the Future. On our podcast today, we have Captain Babe Kwasniak and Pastor Kyle Reynolds. Captain Babe Kwasniak, I don't think I can call you Babe for the rest of the podcast, so we're going to say Coach. Is that what?
Sounds good, Seth. Perfect. Whatever floats your boat.
Well, thanks for being here with us. This is exciting. It is Veterans Day, and it's awesome that we are able to share this podcast with a veteran. So thank you for your service and
thank you for your support. And we want to send a shout out. I know we have a ton in our community here at Friends Church, that a ton of great veterans, great friends of mine, and all throughout. Just a happy Veterans Day for the less than 1% of our country that rose their hand and said, "Send me, I'll go."
Wow. And how long have you been in the Army? Right? Is that what you would say? I went to West Point in 1995. I got out of the Army in 2004, and then I was appointed as a civilian aide to the Secretary of Ohio, the civilian aide to Secretary of the Army in Ohio in 2019. So however long that's been, I think I'm on year 5, I think, of a 10-year term. Okay. And what for... you introduced Kyle, you introduced him as that, but for people, unpack that a little bit. What does it mean to be the civilian aide?
Yes, I'm a 3-star by protocol. So I carry a 3-star general protocol, which means just like the Secretary of the Army, it's a civilian position, which the Madam Wormuth, who is right now is the Secretary of the Army, she's in charge of. She makes the decisions for the entire Army. So our job is basically to tell the Army story, and that's two-pronged, to be the conduit between the Army and the civilian sector. And the 2 prongs of that are recruiting and soldier for life. In terms of recruiting, it's basically talking to administrators, coaches, teachers, and saying, you might not think this is for you, but we want to find the people to defend us. Mm-hmm. And then the second part is the soldier for life for veterans. And I think that's a lot of what I talked about yesterday. Is I never really set out to be the poster child for this mental health thing, but right. It kind of, as God may have it, that's where He's wanted me, and that's where He's used me the most.
And so many people, whether they had active military duty service or not, can resonate so much with your story. But even those who have and have suffered have had a similar story of walking through trauma and loss and all of that. Man, it seems like it's needed now more than ever, what you're doing with Soldiers for Life.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're jumping into, again, week 2. What we couldn't say on Sunday, the point of this podcast, is your first time listening with us, is to get into content that we weren't able to get or linger a little longer on stuff. Man, it was a powerful hearing your story, hearing the different ways in which God has impacted you and shown you these different facets of the Beatitudes, which is what you talked on in Matthew chapter 5. And so, thanks for being willing and transparent to share those moments with us of, your transformation, but trauma and loss and tragedy, but how you're seeing examples of leadership. Like you said, you came out with Jesus is the greatest leader in the world, and you've led with some pretty amazing people over the years. So what, how do you make that jump from, man, I've served under the greatest generals and the greatest leaders, to, wow, this is different. Jesus is different. And that's kind of the nucleus behind your message. Can you unpack that just a little bit more?
You just reminded me of something, Seth, that I didn't get to say yesterday. So the hardest part for me is when I tried to take my own life in 2015. I actually did not tell my story until COVID. And I buried it. I remember in 2017, we won a state championship, and I was like trying to accomplish my way out of depression and anxiety. And I always thought, like, okay, this basically never happened. Like most trauma that goes untreated, I turned it away. And when you mention the leaders I worked for, I remember when General Robert Brooks Brown, who was a 4-star general who now runs AUSA, which is the Army Alumni Association, one of the greatest leaders, like a father to me. I remember he was retiring, and I just got sworn at the Pentagon, and I went to tell him. We went to have we went to have dinner, and I sat down and I couldn't even tell him. I tried a couple times, and I don't know why, but I just couldn't tell him. He was a 1981 West Point graduate. His 3 daughters, uber successful. One played lacrosse at Oregon. Another one actually ran in the Olympics, ran at NC State, and they had another one runs medical device out in Germany. So super successful. They're like a family to my wife Laura and I. BK, our oldest son BK, was born when we were in Fort Lewis out in Seattle. So, and I just couldn't tell him. So fast forward a couple months go, and this guy literally was personality AAA. Right? I know Jim Davis as an example, just a fired up all the time.
Yeah, incredible,
inspiring leader. And after I did this podcast, called the 2% with David Nurse, whose uncle coaches for the Raptors, and we did it for like an hour, and I got it out there. And so I remember calling General Brown, and I said, "Hey, sir, I'm busy. I'm like, sir, I need you to listen to this podcast. It's 52 minutes. And if you know him, he makes coffee nervous. He doesn't have time. He's all over the place." And I'm like, "Sir, no, I'm begging you, please listen to this." And he does. In 53 minutes, my phone rings, and I have tears in my eyes, and first words out of his mouth were, "Quaz, I'm so proud of you." Wow. And the only way, if you were in the military, that I can describe it, it was like you were in the field for 3 or 4 days, didn't have a shower. All you want, you were just so cold, so hungry, and so wet, and just all you want to do is the sun to hit your face. And I can literally just feel Jesus touching my face.
Wow.
For that man to say he was so proud of me, and I knew he would be, and he even said, he goes, "You are the last person I've ever thought would have to go through this." And at one point he's like, "I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you." Like, "Sir, you just led our country in 2 wars. What do you mean you weren't there for me? If it weren't for you, So then I said, "Sir," and then he goes, "Quaz, you're gonna help so many people." And I'm like, whoa. I said, "Sir, I did my duty. Like, I told my story, right? It's out. The worst time of my life is out there." And he goes, "No, babe." He goes, "You have to continue to tell a story." And going back to what we were saying about, letting your light shine.
Yeah.
And I don't enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
Meaning I don't enjoy reliving that all the time. And that's literally the definition of PTSD,
right? Especially
with my buddies that died. It's painful every time, but I also know that if it stops being painful, it's probably not as effective, right? Because it's coming right from the heart. And so the first, "I'm proud of you." And then it was like, "No, I believe in you. You can do this."
Wow.
Right. And then the last part, and that's probably why I didn't talk about this yesterday, because I do get emotional about it, is his daughters were like, sorry guys, they're like daughters to me, and his wife Patty. And I said, "Sir, can you tell Kristen, Kelly, and Brooke, and Mrs. B?" And he said, "Babe, you think they're going to love you any less? We love you no matter what." And that's why I tell people, man, no one's ever died from being loved too much.
Yeah.
And especially loved unconditionally, right? And it doesn't have to be your own blood. That meant more to me. It saved my life.
Yeah. And so you've had incredible leaders come alongside of you and impact you, and have imprinted you with a lot of the things that you unpacked on Sunday, even just the ideas of leadership and the formula, which was leadership, leaders push. Can you unpack that again?
Leaders create a culture,
right?
They create the culture, which exhibits the behaviors, which produces the results.
Yeah.
Right. You want to have, you have to set forth the culture that this is the way we do things around here, right? And it's got to be, once you get that working down, it's amazing how it works itself back up.
Yeah, and a lot of things you picked up in your time in the military. And what is today something that I would be intrigued to hear more about? Just things that you do now. Simply, you're not in the same line of duty you were before. But what do you do now that you carried with you those behaviors, those standards that now you do every day?
I tell you, well, first off are the mistakes I made, Seth, right? I was told by another great leader, I guess I'm name dropping, but it's true. So Mike Krzyzewski from Duke, I remember I was working his camp when I was a young lieutenant, and they put me in the outside station. It was like 100 degrees out in Cameron, and a lot of other coaches made fun of how much energy I had. And he took his finger and he stuck it in my chest. He goes, that's your superpower. Don't ever lose that. And the thing he warned me at the time, he's like, you got to understand, your passion is like it's a fire. It can heat your house and it can cook your food, but if it turns into emotion, it can burn your house down. And unfortunately, I've had my house burned down several times, Seth. Yeah. And I think that's where I learned, and that's why I'm so adamant about when I said Jesus didn't call people out, he called people in. My wife always tells me I'm the most principled human being. That's not always a great thing, right? It's when you guys say on Sundays, let's be more like Jesus and less like God, that's definitely the mistakes I've made in my career. But in terms of the positive, that is positive, right? Because you have to learn.
Humility.
Successful people learn from their mistakes. Uber successful people learn from others' mistakes. So when I'm coaching my kids, I'm like, I'm not telling you guys this. I'm telling you this because I want you to learn. I don't want you to make the same mistakes I had. Right. When I say my kids, I mean the players that I coach here at Cornerstone, my own sons. I mean, that's more important to me than any game we would win or anything.
Anything habitually that you do, like every day, that you see those disciplines come out, other than just like learning from mistakes and being teachable, understanding your passions, anything that you're like, wow, I can trace that back to that.
So I told a long time ago, a sergeant major taught me, if you wanted to get stronger, you can just start by doing push-ups every time before you get in the shower. Huh. And so, you don't need to lift weights or whatever. And I started doing that in, 1997. So every time before I get in the shower, I would do push-ups, and I started at like 10. And then by the time I was a captain in the Army, I was doing like 500 push-ups every time before I got in the shower. And then eventually, over years, doing that consistently. And what it taught me is that motivation's a myth. And there's going to be days where you don't feel like doing it. Yeah. But there cannot be a day where you don't have discipline. And you look at, if you ask my players, there's only one type of discipline. It's perfect. And it's like Jesus in that regard. So yes, you are going to mess up. So if you miss one day, don't miss two.
Right.
But discipline is, and I see it in so many young people, right? There's so many young people that just, how many would raise their hand and say, hey, do you work hard? Or you don't work hard? You think they would raise their hand? No, of course not. Most of them do think they're working hard, but a lot of it, they don't know what that looks like. And the reason they don't know what that looks like is because we have so many folks that aren't leading by example. They're maybe setting the example. So we're doing the right thing. Okay, we're setting the example. So, hey, you get good grades in school, and okay, you're setting the example. Well, how do I lead by example, coach? Well, you get your buddy who's struggling. You help him out, right? Or, hey, I'm in my Bible, right? I'm setting the example. Well, how do I lead by example, coach? You bring somebody with you that they don't even see it in themselves, and you have to see it. That's leading by example. Always involves others.
I love that you said that on Sunday, and I can't remember if you said it every service, but you definitely said it at the 10 o'clock, and it was essence of leadership. You were talking about the essence of leadership is someone has to see something in you that you didn't see in yourself, and for the good stuff and the bad. Right. And how many leaders in our life we've needed calling us out. And truly, if we're being led by the word of God, the word itself, scripture calls us out, that pull in and that pull out. Cause like you said, Jesus, he called people in, but when we look at the people he called in, it was because they deserved it. He called them in order to show them. We talked a lot the last several weeks about identity, like to show them your identity is not in your mistakes. Just like you said, your identity is in Christ, and we have to learn from that. And man, that's good stuff. I actually said that to Levi this morning because we were on the way into school every day. We do this like, you're strong, and I said you're a leader, and he said I'm a leader, and you do the right thing. Leaders do the right thing, and I changed it because it's not just about doing the right thing; it's about setting the example. Leaders set the example. He's like, what? What is that? Yeah, so
an easy formula for me. I lost my sister Joy. I talked about yesterday to ocular melanoma. but joy, Jesus, others, yourself. Kind of hard to go wrong, right?
Right.
You maintain that. And let me say something else too, Seth. I think before I went through what I did, if I saw something in others, I maybe wouldn't voice it for whatever reason. Maybe just, I don't know, I didn't want people to think I was floating their boat or whatever. And the example I'll give you is you. And I mean, I've been here watching you for a couple years, and my wife's your biggest fan. She, like I told you, she wants you to get your own CD. You think that's legit. And that's why I told you what I did yesterday, because, hey man, like, you're on it, right? And that doesn't mean you're perfect. That doesn't mean, but if I see that in you, I'm not doing my job if I don't tell you that.
And that's been something you feel like has been an uptick in you since you've walked through what you've walked through.
Absolutely. Everyone thinks it's, everyone thinks it's always just correcting people. Like, no, I mean, we gotta uplift them, uplift them more. And the other problem is too, there's no such thing as tough love. You know what it is? It's love tough. You ask anybody who's been around me, and they'll tell you, "Oh my goodness, he is so hard on his son." Well, I'm so hard on my son because my son has no doubt how much I love him. And once he tells me that he wants to live to his standard, I'm going to hold him to that standard. And if he always likes me, just like, as you guys know, if your kids always like you, probably doing something wrong. You're not there to be their friend. You're there to be their parent. Right. And both can definitely exist. And I learned that in the military. There's so many other places where like, oh, you don't hang out with the people you work with. In the Army, we were just great at that. We understood when someone's correcting you, they're not correcting you as a person, they're correcting your behavior. And discipline in Proverbs is one of the highest forms of love. And if I love you, I'm going to make sure you do it right. And the truth is, as a coach, as a person, when I stop engaging with you, that's... I'm hopefully I'm never giving up on someone under my jurisdiction, but right, that's hate's not the opposite of love. Apathy is.
Yes.
People have to learn to get coached. It's especially with our young folks. Learn to have someone get hard on you. I always say as a coach, my job is not to get kids to college; it's to get them through college. All right, like my oldest son BK is crushing it at West Point. He's top of his class, interviewing to be a Rhodes Scholar. You know, the day before he left, it was, we were here, we were at church, you guys had him up on stage, and he's like, man, Dad, he's like, this is it. This is going to be really tough. And I'm like, hey, son, you think it's going to be any tougher than I was on you? And he goes, no way.
Why? One, you're like a Twitter feed of all these things. Like I've like really sat here silent, like sitting on my hands because I just want to like, wait, say that again. Like I'm taking notes here. Why? How do we get it so wrong in culture? Like, why do we go backwards and focus so much more on results than the behaviors that get those results?
If you ask the late Ted Kwasniak, who just passed a couple weeks ago, he would always tell me, Kyle, he would say, and the guy, obviously, as you know, was so knowledgeable, 7 state championships. He always said, kids have not changed. The way we're raising them has changed. Meaning, we used to prepare our kids for the path. Now we're doing too much for them, guys. We really are. Like, and I understand the world has changed. I get that. But think of like, the play dates and we're doing. I mean, when's the last time you saw a pickup baseball game or a pickup football game? I grew up on the playground playing hoops. So it's not even there anymore. It's a place called Upson Playground. Everything I learned about leadership, everything I learned, I would think, West Point. No, I learned it there. I learned how to be tough. I learned how to be resilient. I learned that everybody doesn't get a trophy. It doesn't work that way, right? You gotta work hard. You gotta earn it. And I learned that my parents had nothing to do with it. And we've just gotten to the point, and I've tried to mention that yesterday, is everything's the coach's fault. Everything's everything's the teacher's fault. And I mean, I can drop a list of what your parents or what anybody owes you. It's here. And if anything, I try to teach my players, it's the opposite, guys. You don't think like this way, but you owe your parents. And you're not going to realize that now. But 10 years from now, 15 years, 20 years from now, you could be like, man, every time my mom and dad drove me to practice, they made this sacrifice to send me to this Christian school. Like, you're going to realize nobody gets there on accident.
Right.
Funny you say that. I just was talking to a former player of yours, like just this last week. And I don't know how it came up. I don't know the exact context. It doesn't really matter, but he goes, this year I realized, which this kid is hilarious. He's always a day late. I mean, like it's really funny which I love him, and I'm not going to name drop him because I don't want anyone to think that I don't love him or I'm making fun of him. But the other day he said to me, he goes, it just clicked with me. He's like, all those things that my teacher said, all those things that coach said, all those things I learned, maybe they did know more than I did. Mm. And that was an epiphany of like for him. And you could see it. And I'm like, at first I was like, well, what do you mean? But I didn't want to spoil the moment because he was really like flowing, almost getting emotional with like, I really appreciated my time here. And I wish if I would have understood then what I know now, I probably would have appreciated or leaned in more.
That's how this kids though goes. If we had, a greater awareness of the significance of where you're at and who's pouring in, who you're spending time with and all of those things, you just learn to soak it in.
But this is the time they're supposed to make mistakes. This is when they're supposed to screw up, and you have to learn now. So, and that's what we would do in the Army, guys. We would teach them attention to detail to the minute detail, because those little things add up and make a huge difference, and they can result in life and death. Mm-hmm. And certain people learn at different rates, right? And in different ways. But it all starts with, and that's probably the number one thing I've ever learned about leadership from General Brown, who I was telling you about. He would always say, soldiers don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And he would tell me that all the time. He's like, Quaz, but you can't talk about it. You got to be about it. You got to show them that you care for them. You can't just, and a lot of showing them that you care is by showing up. The best ability is availability.
So question, right? You talked, and again, I want to be careful. I don't want to bash the Browns again, but you talked about the difference of two organizations on Sunday. You talked about the repeated performance of the Browns and just how we're constantly chasing results. In fact, I don't think it's too much to say that we'll even sacrifice values to get results. Quality of pair. And I know sometimes we hold our athletes to higher standards. Okay, but then you compare that to another organization, and that of Chick-fil-A. And this idea that how is it that no matter what level of service, it could be the guy who comes and gets your cup, asks you if you want a refill, to the person who's emptying the trash. If you say thank you, their response is my pleasure. Which, side note, it's a really fun game that my family and I play. Is we just try to see how many times we can get someone at Chick-fil-A to say my pleasure. So free one there. Okay. But my whole point is, if you have a culture that translates down to the and again, I don't mean this in a negative sense, but like to the lowest of the low, to the person changing the trash can.
Yeah. Yes.
What kind of indoctrination, what kind of repeated repetition, what kind of behavior has to get set forth at the top for it to roll that far down?
Yeah.
I think it starts with, and I'll answer this as a coach. And you've known me long enough, Kyle, that you know I'll have anywhere from 12 to 14 players on my team. Now, do they all have the same roles? No. But I'm going to coach that 14th guy like I'm going to coach my first guy. And why do I do that? I'm going to do that because that shows that his job is just as important as this guy's job. That doesn't mean they're equivalent, but it's one thing to know your role. It's another thing to accept your role. And then when you start building that culture, you know what happens? You have people excelling in their roles, right? I feel like that's where the magic happens. And I'm so intrigued and fascinated by, look at what Jesus did. I mean, I know Peter and James and John are mentioned so much more, but think about how different those personalities have been. And that's variety is the spice of life, right? Is that we're all different. And, it just...
Well, yeah, there's what was recorded. What was not recorded?
Yes. Yeah. What couldn't they say on Sunday?
Yeah. And I don't mean that in a non-sacred to what is recorded, but you do wonder, man, 3 years of doing life, 3 years of joking around, 3 years of walking, 3 years of just hanging out, 3 years of
mistakes.
Yeah. What that is. And yet as you stated yesterday or on Sunday, that idea that Jesus always called them in. He invited them to level up. He invited them to bring their doubts, their pains, their failures, their loss. I mean, I go back to Peter. You said it, but we just did a series on Peter last year, Easter last year. And just that moment where that dude was back on the shore, the culmination of that message. He's back on the shore, going back to fishing, the thing that he was called away from, but here he is back to fishing. And Jesus walks in and replays his entire 3 years with him and says, hey man, it's time to get going again. You're not going to be defined by your mistakes. I'm going to invite you to not just be a fisherman, but a fisher of men.
Mm-hmm.
And,
awesome.
And to think about that and go, but how often do we write people off? How often is our cancel culture? We do not tolerate. We have elevated results to be this deity that someone, if they don't deliver, they're out. And we shirk the responsibility of actually walking within the small things.
And how often do we do that with the people, our subordinates, right? When we do that with our pupils, I know with my players. I got time for a quick story, just a General Dempsey story. So he was talking at it was an FCA event. No, I think it was an Olympic event, and there was 3 speakers. It was Clark Kellogg, who actually played for my dad, David Robinson, who played at Navy, and then General Dempsey. And it was a basketball community. So these folks are all like, "Oh, you work for that guy?" Well, like he was in charge of everybody, so theoretically everybody worked for that guy. But yes, I know him well. And Clark went first, and he basically said, "Own your own development." So just like we were talking about, it's not your parents, it's not your teachers, not your coaches. You own your development. David Robinson went and he said, "The best ability in terms of being a mentor and a leader is your availability." He goes, Tim Duncan used to wear me out. He's like 3:00 in the morning, phone rings. I'm like, what can this dude possibly want at 3 a.m? But Tim Duncan was just thirsty for that knowledge. Blessed is he who, right? And he just wanted that knowledge from him. So he had to give it to him. So then General Dempsey goes, and the week ago, he was just knighted in England, and I'm thinking to myself, right? Like, people have no idea what a big deal this guy is. And he says, I was on the border of Germany and Czechoslovakia, right after the Vietnam War. Army had a race problem and a drug problem, and I go to the gate, and it's a small compound, probably not much bigger than our grounds here at Friends, and they didn't have the commo we do now. And there's a nun at the gate. So, he had to go check it out. He's a lieutenant now. So this is after West Point, this is your first rank, right? This is the 4-star general is a long time. And he gets to the gate, and she speaks English. He goes, "So sister, you're American?" She goes, "Yes, I'm just from a missionary down the street, and I just want to pray at your soldiers." So they let her in, they get in the Humvee, and they're going past the basketball courts. And he's just thinking, there were 2 guys being UCMJ'd for pretty serious stuff on the basketball court. One might have even been, rape or whatever. It was, one of them was drugs. And she goes, "What about those soldiers? Can I pray with them?" And he goes, "Oh no, sister, those are some of my roughest and toughest soldiers." So they're driving, and she says, "Stop the Humvee." Stops Humvee. She gets out. They teach us as lieutenants about the military decision-making process. It still sticks with me to this day. And he goes, the best case scenario was not very good. Maybe they could ignore her. The worst case scenario is I'm not going to be 4-star General Dempsey someday, right? It's going to be bad. Said, so his first sergeant, because you're always putting out fires as a lieutenant, says, "Hey, LT." He turns around to put out another fire, turns back around, and every guy on this court is on their hands and knees praying with this nun. He said he gets back in the Humvee. He said he never felt so small in his entire life. Right. He said as they're driving away in the Humvee, she takes her finger and sticks it in his chest, and she says, "Don't you ever give up on the people you lead again." And he said he decided in that moment that if they quit on him, that was okay. But as a leader, we don't have that luxury, guys. Like, how many times do we say, I can't tell you how many times I say, you know what, this kid is... And when I say cancer, you guys know what I mean. This kid is cancerous to our team. He's making our team less. But no, that's your job as a leader to call that kid in and stop calling him out. It's your job to get him to perform to where he feels like he's part of a team. It's never okay for us to give up on them, especially at a young age, right? And now, even if we're turning a profit, I guess maybe that's a different conversation. But in our ministry and what we do, guys, if we're really who we say we are.
Well, yeah, but you didn't say settle for their standards. See, that's the other thing. It's accountability, but it's also maintaining standards. It's also maintaining the behavior. Why? Because it's driven by your culture.
And the ones will leave. You're right, Kyle.
Exactly.
Because if they can't do it, they will leave.
That's the thing we forget about is the people who stay are just as important as the people who left. The people who didn't make it are the people who said, you know what, I don't want to work hard. I don't want to fight with you in this way. I don't want to labor with you in this. That's a gift as much as it is for the people who say, no, I do. And we tend to get, I don't know, dismissive, or we value ourselves or devalue ourselves based on that. And it's like, no, that's the gift of
high expectations never survive low standards. My mission statement, I don't know if you guys have watched Ted Lasso. It's my favorite show. Have you guys watched that yet?
I'm a follower of Christ. No, yes, I know Ted Lasso. Yes.
So, but my mission statement is players over plays, because the players I have are more important than the plays I'm running.
Right.
Team over players, culture over team, believe or leave. And that's what you're saying, Kyle. So here's the deal. If you don't believe in this, it's eventually going to work itself out, because the rest of us are going here. And once we get here, we're not going below that. That doesn't mean we're not going to mess up, especially, I mean, we're allowed to make mistakes. Only one man was perfect, and he did that, so we can make mistakes. But to have a high performing organization, the standard is the standard, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. And that's what, kind of wrapping this up, I think there's a lot of good stuff here, but kind of coming back to the main point of the message was, Jesus was the ultimate, the best leader in the world, because everything that we just said here is said through that lens. He never gave up, right? He called people in. He went to them, right, to bring them back in.
Well, it's funny you say that's a Facebook thing, but it's so powerful. Judas ate too.
Yeah.
At the Last Supper, right? This highlight pivotal moment where he's talking about this new covenant, that his body's going to be broken. He still shared and broke bread with Judas, right, the person who actually stabbed him behind the back. So talk about inclusivity. Talk about that leader who called people in.
And I think too, even as Christians, guys, I mean, I see it all the time, and especially coming from a Roman Catholic church, it's got to be the same Jesus, right? I mean, how many different secular do we have or how many different sects do we have of the Catholic or of Christianity? And why I say that is because it's like I said yesterday. I don't care what got you to Jesus. My prayer for you is you don't have to drive off a cliff or try to drive off a cliff to get there like I did.
Right.
But I don't understand why we get so tied up in how they get there. To your point, Kyle, about keeping them in the culture, how about we keep them there? And a big way of keeping them there is once they got, in my world, they got to be coachable, then they got to be a great teammate, then they're going to become a leader. And guess what? When they become a leader, then they're going to be bringing other people in, because great leaders do not just have followers, they create more leaders.
Right.
And how did Jesus do that? I mean, he did that he was the one that was always right. But how do we do that is, we just always have to be real. We always have to be authentic.
Right.
And knowing that we're not always going to be right.
Right.
And that's okay. And admit when we're wrong.
Well, how do we do that? And it's exactly the culmination of Sunday. It was poor in spirit, to recognize that we have nothing and Christ has everything. And we're so in need to mourn, to grieve, to realize that there are others who we have a loss, of our, a loss of our own dying to self, and mourning that to take hold of what Christ has, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, to be merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers. There's a culture that he lays out to say this is the way, and for us to follow. So
can I just say one more thing? I just thought of something, because a guy at work said this other day at the Pentagon. He goes, "You've really reached a certain level in leadership when you can basically not like somebody, like wouldn't hang out with them, and then you can see something and you're like, I wish I was more like that." My question to you, gentlemen, is, isn't that intriguing to think about who thought like that way about Jesus? Like, hey man, like I want this guy on the stake, but man, his people love him. You know what I mean? Like, you're right. The Centurions, they had to be like, man, this guy, like, I don't see what the big deal is, but something's going on because this isn't normal.
It's exactly what we said last week. You know, what would it look like? What would it be like? What would the impact of a church that was so good at being the church, loving people so well, that if it ceased to exist, the most ardent atheist would be sad. That would be good.
Well, and as a veteran, being a part of the best team in the world, in the United States Army, I want to tell you gentlemen, that I love being a part of your team. I love being a part of this community. I love being a part of this church. It's changed my life. It really truly has. I mean, the 4 years, especially post-COVID, everyone sees COVID as their worst time. My family sees it as the best time in our lives because it brought us here to you guys. Wow. So thank you. Love you guys. And I appreciate the opportunity all weekend.
Well, we thank you for being on this and taking the time to share so many nuggets of wisdom. So thanks, Captain Babe Kwasniak, for being with us. And until next time, join us this weekend. We can't wait for more of this To the Future series. Thanks for joining us today on What We Couldn't Say on Sunday. We hope this podcast helps you dive deeper into God's Word and possibly answered some questions that you may have had from Sunday. Don't forget to check out our website for more information about Friends Church and all that is happening. We hope to see you this weekend.